What do you get when you mix a teaspoon of overpopulation, a large container of unwashed scoundrels, the non-existence of the influenza shot, a dash of pestilence in the slimy streets, and a quart of muck-ridden rats hosting more blood-sucking parasites than your local political debate? You get today's video topic. Ah yes, if there's anything that tickles the fancy of today's antibiotic-resistant fleas or genocidal sociopaths, it's the prospect of mass extermination of human beings through biologically transmitted bubonic plague. And what do you know? Back when backgammon and staring at portraits of Her Majesty the Queen were considered various breeds of entertainment, there was also a little something that was decimating 1/3 of the European population. The Black Plague can be quaintly compared to modern rap music. Sure, it's over relatively quickly and is loosely associated with the color black, but it also attracts fleas, causes intense pain to anyone who has to suffer it, and, if exposed for long enough time periods, it may cause oozing, bloody boils to protrude from the skin. I was originally going to focus this video's topic around the Great Potato Famine, but I imagined that would have incited post-traumatic stress disorder upon my ginger-headed friends, so I decided to be nice. Instead, I'll invoke this fear upon filthy European peasants and commoners, who added little to society apart from manual labor and the spread of poverty. But ice, you remark, twisting one of your chromosomes in the hopes of impressing girls. I know that the plague is hecking deadly, but what are its effects? Well, young and impressionable pupil, this plague shall have you stating, Mr. Stark, but vomiting blood and dying before you can finish your sentence. But, you hot-headed miscreant, before we can dive into the pool of effects, we first must climb the diving board of cause! You dingus. So, the Black Death starts out with a little beaut of a disease known as Yersinia pestis. Don't forget to italicize that. Though this may sound like Latin mumbo-jumbo, it's actually the binomial name for the bacterial bundle of chromosomes responsible for transmitting bubonic plague. The Yersinia pestis, Y pestis for short, could be typically seen hiking about on rats. But that ain't the only filthy freeloader bumming off rodents for food and shelter. Them rats also got fleas as occupants. Now listen closely, kids. You're gonna quickly witness parasitism in action. So, when the bloodthirsty flea guzzles the infected rat blood for its score-laden nutrients, it'll also slurp up the Y. pestis lurking about in the infected blood. Unfortunately for the flea, the Y. pestis strain will actually clog in its foregut, making nothing able to enter the flea's tiny stomach and causing it to go hungry. This causes mouths to be choking and blood on the table as the ravenous and presumably constipated flea hops about onto other members of the order Rodentia and regurgitates the infected life juice from the rat it harvested it from onto other rats, thereby starting the spreading of Y. pestis. When the rat gets infected blood spewed across the canvas of its fur by fricking Flea Ross, either nothing will happen because the rat is resistant to the plague, or it will keel over and die. By this time, the flea is likely going stark raving mad with hunger. So, if the rat it's leeching upon decides now's the time for its untimely death, the flea will just go frick it and start feasting upon other animals. One of those being humans! Just remember, kids, that innocent little tingling or itch you may feel upon your arm might actually be a flea injecting strains of the bubonic plague into your bloodstream. Now, despite being called the Black Plague, I see no evidence of the plague only infecting African Americans. Then again, it shouldn't be called the White Plague either, as bubonic plague doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what race, class, origin, religion, gender, income, wealth, job, hair color, eye color, height, width, length, orientation, disability, social security number, level in Mario Kart, or any other factor you have that the NAACP will demand for increased representation of in various public facilities. All that matters is that you're a potential housing facility that fleas can inject their pesky Y. pestis in, and it won't pay its rent on time. The Black Plague, like your typical Red Power Rangers action figure or the one-child policy, was made in China sometime in the 1330s after multitudinous natural catastrophes and mini-plagues, plus the political upheaval, kinda impaired the country's ability to, well, grow food. Ruh-roh. This resulted in mass famine that led to an even bigger and better plague almost directly following the nutriment detriment, causing a virtual fifth wave that ransacked tens of millions of Asians and caused a drastic reduction in the next national census. The scholarly spellcasting warlocks on Wikipedia debate where the plague decided to plan its vacation at tripmasters.com next, but it likely either spread further in Asian countries through merchant ships, or it went off to see the wizard via the not yellow Silk Road. And Europeans weren't blind to this while all this was happening either. They were hearing rumors through the grapevine about many Asian countries being chock full of corpse piles too infected to bury or burn, though the bodies were instead used as decorative lawn ornaments. Hey dude, what's that thing in your lawn? It's my new garden gnome. You like it? Looks a little too fleshy and contorted to be a midget in a cone hat. And it reeks like the dead! Exactly! It adds to the hyper-realism of it. Oh sweet! Where can I get one? Right now! And eventually, the first documented instance of the plague entering Europe occurred in 1347 in the Sicily trading port of Messina, a semi-regular trade route, after 12 Genoese ships rocked into port with a bunch of sailors either dead or near dead from bubonic plague and or scurvy. And wouldn't you know it, rats and fleas were also aboard. Real quick, just want to point out these traders came from the city of Kaffa in Ethiopia, which they fled due to a Mongol army chucking plague-ridden corpses over the city walls via catapult in an effort to infect the locals. Of course, the catapult is much lesser in quality when compared to the mighty trebuchet, but the Mongols were still successful with their Angry Birds-style warfare regardless. Anyways, after the Europeans realized the ship outside contained a collection of salty footloosers biting the dust from the world's worst case of the cough, they quickly ordered the ships to be gone, presumably pushing the boat and its occupants back out to sea to go die somewhere else. Fortunately for the Europeans, our main protagonists, the rats, and their parasitic fleet passengers, officially unlocked new destination, Europe, as they bounced off the ship and onto this whole new world we live in. Pokemon Joe! Stop. The plague could have arrived through several other entry points, but screw them, this one's better. The plague also kinda struck the Middle East in the underbelly by smashing the economic and social structures of the region harder than Endgame hit the box office, but well, you know, nobody talks about that. So we won't either! Back to the non-vaccinated Europe, the Black Plague essentially was granted free breeding grounds to the slimy and disgusting hordes roaming the continent with their scraggly beards and their unintelligible gobbledygook. Like seriously, the conditions were more befouling than a YouTube comment section debate betwixt two people of the opposite political party. Densely crowded homes rotted of filth more horrendous than Alabama. Live animals like pigs and cattle roamed the streets and drank from street water mixed with human and animal waste. And the closest thing to hygiene was shaking out your beard to rid it of the smoggy ash and parasitic tapeworms nesting inside of it. So it didn't come as a surprise to many to spot a few extra fleas bouncing about. Honey, I think we have fleas again.
We always have fleas.
I don't know though. I feel that these fleas are different. Like they're infected with a strain of a deadly virus gained from sucking rat blood and would cause excruciating symptoms if the strain was to come into contact with any of us.
You're looking too far into it. Just ignore them.
1 week later.
And since the living conditions were so freaking atrocious, the fleas were easily able to transcend through time and space and infect their victims with plague. When one gets the bubonic plague, they may experience spots and rashes, fatigue, the upchucking of their life juice, a quite acute fever, chills, nausea, and acrogangrene in the fingers that butchers the skin and flesh and turns the fingers black. I state that like I didn't already have that. What the plague was most characterized by, however, was the oozing, warlike buboes that were the size of a fricking egg, appeared around the armpit, neck, or that one part of your body that you wouldn't want anything like that near. And they bled blood and pus when opened. Now, when diagnosed with bubonic plague, your reaction wasn't just, "Yes! I have a valid excuse to escape that Algebra 2 test, and shall further procrastinate upon it until the time eventually comes to take it, of which I will still be totally unprepared even though I had an extra day to study for it."
It's more like, well, I'm basically a walking carcass now.
Yeah, considering the chances of survival back then were about 20 to 30% when the plague was contracted, it's no wonder that bubonic plague outbreaks were about the time that quarantine was invented.
Being the 14th century, people had bamboozlingly crackpot theories as to what the cause of this great dying was, due to the fact that, being the anti-vaxxers they were, medical knowledge was rather impoverished at the time.
Many perplexed evangelicals believed that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was punishing them for being naughty. In response, somewhat, "That's it, I'm a heretic now," and began their studies of witchcraft, punishable by arson, while others began using whips and stuff to beat themselves silly in an effort that was somehow supposed to persuade the gods to put a stop to their suffering. "God, if you can hear me, please stop this madness! My mom is plagued with the plague, my cat has been infested so much her flea collar has stopped functioning, and there's dead bodies in the streets!" Which, now that I think about it, isn't too different from what it was before. "But if you don't stop this plague, I'll wrap this whip around my neck!" You know, you sound like one of those jackass boneheads that causes abusive relationships by threatening to harm themselves if their partners break up with them. I have a whip, you know. The French king decided to chip in his 3 cents on the whereabouts the sudden pestilence sprung from by stating that the plague was caused by bad air. This became the most circulated and widely believed theory for the time being. And then there's the individuals with the tinfoil hats and the thumbtacks on their bulletin boards who did what any spooked, crooked individual would have done at the time. Blame an ethnic minority group. That's right, a group of dingbats, with brains the size of acorns, decided to blame the Jews for the plague and raid their cities, despite the fact that Jews were also clocking out in droves from the same bubonic infection that was considered hip and trendy for one to possess at the time. But, like the creepy band of vapors a few neurons short of a brain cell, who gather together in a circle and stare emotionlessly at anybody who tries to enter the restroom, there's no talking sense into those who are already mentally diminished.
Sounds like a fun time,
You state, waving around your torch like a Genji main waves his ultimate.
but clearly they had a treatment for it, right?
Well, never fear, you hot-headed dingbat, for the freaking plague doctors are here! Plague doctors were medieval loose cannons disguised as physicians, hired by the cities to treat citizens of their chronic pneumonic bubonic. And by treat, I mean mutilate. Plague doctors, most of the time, were of ill experience, mostly being either young neonates fresh out of the egg looking for practice, or second-hand doctors with such horrendous ideas of treatment that they couldn't make a living anywhere else. I have come to the conclusion you are currently suffering from the bubonic plague. What? Well, no dip, Sherlock. A bloody dingo could have told me that. What else do you charge? $500. The plague apothecaries equipped meaty leather overcoats, nifty professional hats, and a gas mask with a beak filled with scented materials like lavender or asbestos to shield their sniffers from the bad air. They also carried canes to poke and prod the victims to avoid direct contact, or even take frickin' pulses. Somehow. While the overcoat was successful in guarding the plague doctors from plague because it was dummy thick, it ended up just spreading the plague even further when the plague doctor went to new locations because the coat essentially turned into a plague rag. Perhaps the objectively both worst and best part of these body parties is the treatments they diagnose for their patients. Normally, one would just be prescribed a pill or an insulin bag and be on their way, but you must realize we're in the 14th century, and whack job problems and whack job times call for whack job solutions. Treatments included bloodletting, eating spoons of crushed emerald cereal, leeches on buboes, frogs on buboes, rubbing slice and dice snake and onion parts on buboes, swallowing rotten treacles, which are frickin' sugar byproducts or something, sitting near a fire and or in a sewer, washing oneself with
urine and feces. Yes, urine and feces.
not thinking bad thoughts, carving up a frickin' pigeon and rubbing frickin' sheared pigeon all over the infected body, chug-jugging vinegar, mercury, arsenic, or crushed minerals, and, my personal favorite, rubbing oneself with a live chicken's shaved rear end and strapping it onto their swelling buboes until the chicken gets sick, at which point one washes the chicken and repeats the process. These methods generally saw a success rate of 0, most of the time only making it worse. Yet still, I personally trust the plague doctors more than today's doctors, because at least plague doctors had the decency to not use their greasy fingers to invade my personal bubble space. The plague shaved off 25 million Europeans at its peak in 1347 to 1351, and, in the altogether, this great plague dropped the entire human population by about 100 to 125 million people in the 14th century alone, sparking religious upheaval, governmental confusion, and the prevalence of the plague for centuries after to wipe out small communities and annoy the bejesus out of people. So what's the overall lesson of this story? Wear a flea collar.